When I walked into the courtroom that morning, my daughter Dawn rolled her eyes and whispered something dismissive to her husband Dave. But then, something extraordinary happened. The judge looked up, froze completely, and murmured in disbelief, "It's her." The entire courtroom fell silent. None of them had any idea who I really was until that moment. That trial changed everything. My name is Maeve. I am 69 years old, and until a few months ago, I was just a regular, everyday grandma. Each morning I woke up at 6, brewed my coffee in the same chipped mug I'd used for 20 years, and looked out the window of my small kitchen as I watered the African violets my late husband loved so much. It was a simple, predictable life, full of small rituals that gave me peace. For 45 years, I was the mother who sacrificed everything for my only daughter, Dawn. I worked nights cleaning offices, sold homemade cupcakes on the weekends, and sewed clothes to make a few extra bucks. It was all so she could go to college and have the life I never had. When she married Dave, an arrogant man who never said a kind word to me, I swallowed my pride and welcomed them into my house every Sunday with a table set and my best smile. I thought that after my husband passed away, Dawn and I would grow closer. How naive I was. Instead of finding comfort in our shared company, my daughter began to see me as a burden. Her visits became obligatory and cold, her calls less frequent, and her excuses for avoiding me grew more and more creative. The greatest humiliation of my life came on a gray Thursday in October. I had prepared the chicken and dumplings she loved, the kind that took me hours to make, but always made her smile when she was a little girl. I put out my best tablecloth, the one with the embroidery I had done when she was a teenager, and even bought fresh flowers for the centerpiece. When they arrived, Dave walked into my house as if he owned it, slumped into my late husband's armchair, and turned on the television without even saying hello. Dawn wore a green dress I had bought her myself, but her expression was as cold as January ice. "Mom, we need to talk," she said in that voice she had developed since she got married, a voice that sounded like it belonged to a stranger. She sat on the edge of the chair, as if in a hurry to leave. "Dave and I have made a decision," she continued, as he sat on the sofa, his eyes glued to the screen. "This house is too big for you. You can't maintain it alone anymore. And we need a bigger place for when we have kids. We found the perfect retirement community for people your age." I felt as though the floor had opened up beneath me. This was the house where Dawn had taken her first steps, where we had celebrated every birthday, where her father had died holding my hand. Every corner held our most sacred memories. Every photograph on the wall told our story. "But Dawn, this is our home. All our memories are here," I pleaded, my voice trembling, each word breaking as it left my mouth. "Memories are in the heart, Mom, not on the walls," she replied with a coldness that chilled me to the bone. "Besides, the community has activities for people like you. You'll be better off there. You'll have company your own age." Dave smiled with satisfaction as he began to measure the rooms with his eyes, as if he were already the owner. "It's for the best, Mrs. Maeve," he added with that fake smile I hated so much. "We'll take care of all the paperwork. Don't you worry about a thing." My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. My own daughter, the child for whom I had sacrificed my youth, my health, and my dreams, was throwing me out of my own house to give my home to that despicable man. Tears threatened to fall, but I swallowed them back. I wouldn't give them the pleasure of seeing me cry. "I need time to think," I murmured, with what little dignity I had left. "There's not much to think about, Mom," Dawn replied, standing up. "It's already decided. They're coming to appraise the house next week." And with that, they left. They left my chicken and dumplings untouched, my flowers wilting and my heart in pieces on the table where we had once been a happy family. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the photographs on the wall. Dawn as a baby, Dawn on her first day of school, Dawn on her graduation day. In every picture, I was there, holding her, hugging her, smiling with pride. How had it come to this? How had the girl who once told me I was her hero now treat me like trash? The following days were a nightmare. Dave brought a real estate appraiser without warning, a man in a gray suit who walked through my house as if it were an object for sale. He took notes, measured rooms, and talked about potential and necessary renovations, as if I weren't even there. Dawn accompanied him, nodding at every disparaging comment about my home. "The pipes are old," the appraiser said, "and these kitchen tiles are dated. You'd have to change everything." My husband had put in those tiles with his own hands when Dawn was 10 years old. Each one represented hours of work, love, and hope for our future. But to them, they were just obstacles to their new life. The humiliation reached its lowest point when Dawn brought home brochures for the retirement community. "Look, Mom, it has beautiful gardens, and they have bingo on Tuesdays," she said, in that fake voice she used when she wanted to convince me of something. "Plus, there's a nurse on duty 24/7. You'll be safer." Safer. I had lived in this house for 30 years without a single problem. I knew all my neighbors, I had my routines, my plants, my memories. But to Dawn, none of that mattered. All that mattered was that I get out of her way. The day I least expected it, they arrived with papers. Dave walked in like he was the owner, followed by Dawn and a man who introduced himself as a lawyer. "Mrs. Maeve, we have all the documents prepared for the transfer of the property. We just need your signature." "Transfer?" I asked, confused. "I thought you were going to sell the house." Dawn avoided my gaze. "Well, Dave and I decided to keep it. It's better for the family to hold on to properties." That's when I understood everything. It wasn't just that they wanted me out. They wanted to take ownership of my house, the legacy my husband and I had built with so much effort. It was a robbery disguised as filial concern. "I'm not signing anything," I said with the firmest voice I could muster. Dave stood up abruptly. His face completely changed, revealing the aggression he had always kept hidden when my husband was alive. "Ma'am, you're no longer in a condition to make decisions. Dawn is your only heir, and she is acting in your best interest." "This is my house," I yelled, surprising myself with my own strength. "And I'm not leaving." "Mom, don't make this harder," Dawn murmured, finally showing some discomfort. "You know you can't keep living alone. Last week you forgot to turn off the gas stove." It was a lie. I had never forgotten to turn off the gas. But Dave smiled as if he had just found the perfect excuse. "Come on, Dawn. Your mother isn't well. It's dangerous to leave her alone." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, if you don't sign voluntarily, we might have to explore other legal options. A mental incapacity proceeding, for instance." I felt the world closing in on me. My own daughter was willing to have me declared incompetent to steal my house. The man I had accepted as a son-in-law was threatening me in my own living room. And I, a 69-year-old woman, was completely alone against them. "I need time," I muttered, defeated. "You have 1 week," Dave said coldly. "Then we'll do what we have to do." When they left, I collapsed into my husband's armchair and cried as I hadn't since his funeral. I cried for the daughter I had lost, for the home they were taking from me, for the life that was crumbling around me. I felt betrayed, humiliated, completely defenseless. That night, for the first time in my life, I considered giving up. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was too old, too weak, too useless to fight. Maybe it was best to accept my fate and disappear quietly just as they wanted. But then, something inside me refused to die. A small flame of dignity that still burned in my chest. I wasn't going to let them trample all over me without a fight, not after a lifetime of sacrifice and devotion. The next day, Dawn came back alone. For a moment, my heart filled with hope. Maybe she had reconsidered. Maybe she had come to ask for my forgiveness. How wrong I was. "Mom, I came to help you pack," she said in that robotic voice she had adopted. "I brought boxes. We can start with your clothes." I stared at her, searching for any trace of the girl I had raised, but I only found a stranger, cold and calculating. "Dawn, please reconsider. I'm your mother." "That's exactly why I'm doing this," she replied without looking me in the eye. "Because I love you, and I want what's best for you." Love. This was love. stripping me of my home, my dignity, everything I had left. That was love. For the next few hours, Dawn began to pack my belongings as if they were worthless objects. She took my family photos and shoved them carelessly into boxes. She packed the books my husband had given me, the dishes from my wedding china, the tablecloths I had embroidered during years of sleepless nights. "This dress is so old, Mom. I don't think you need it," she said, holding up my mourning dress, the one I had worn to my husband's funeral. "Leave it," I begged. "Please, just leave it." But she had already put it in a donation bag. My pain didn't matter. My feelings didn't matter. I didn't matter. The final straw was when she found my jewelry box. Inside were my wedding ring, the earrings my husband had given me for our 20th anniversary, and a small gold chain that had belonged to my mother. "This jewelry will be safer in a safe deposit box," Dawn said, putting it in her purse. "It could get lost or stolen at the community." "Those are mine!" I yelled, trying to snatch the purse from her. "Mom, you're getting very upset. This just confirms you can't take care of yourself," she replied with that sickening calmness that chilled me to the bone. In that moment, I knew I had lost my daughter forever. The Dawn I knew had died, and in her place was this heartless woman, manipulated by Dave and blinded by greed. That night when Dawn left, taking my jewelry and my most precious memories with her, I was left alone in my half-empty house. The bare walls reminded me of how little I had left, how easy it had been for them to dismantle a lifetime. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my living room, surrounded by open boxes and scattered memories, and I wondered how it had come to this, at what point I had become invisible, when I had ceased to matter. The following days were a living hell. Dave came early every morning to supervise the process, as if I were incapable of packing my own things. He brought in strangers who measured, photographed, and appraised every corner of my house. They talked about me as if I weren't present, as if I were an old piece of furniture that needed to be removed. "The lady will have to speed up the process," Dave said to Dawn. "The movers are coming on Monday." It was Friday. I had 3 days left in the home where I had lived for 30 years, where I had raised my daughter, where I had loved and been loved. "What if I don't finish packing?" I asked in a whisper. "Don't worry, Mom," Dawn replied without looking up from her phone. "The movers will take care of everything. Just take what's essential." "What's essential?" As if an entire lifetime could be reduced to the essential. That afternoon, after they left, I walked through my house like a ghost. I touched the walls my husband had painted. I sat in every chair where we had eaten family breakfasts. I opened every drawer that held little treasures from my past life. In my husband's desk drawer, I found old letters, paid bills, and some documents I had never looked at. Most of them were unimportant, but there was one folder I had never seen. It was marked with my husband's initials and had a small lock on it. Curious and desperate to find something, anything to connect me to better times, I looked for the key in all his usual spots. I finally found it inside an old book, marking a page that talked about investments and properties. When I opened the folder, my world changed forever. There were documents I didn't fully understand, but one caught my attention immediately. It was a will, dated just 6 months before my husband's death, that I had never seen before. My hands trembled as I read. My husband had been much more far-sighted than I imagined. And Dawn, my dear Dawn, had no idea what she was about to discover. With shaking hands, I began to read the will that would change my life forever. My husband, who had always been so reserved about money, had been much busier than I imagined during his final years. The document revealed that my dear husband hadn't just been the modest employee I believed him to be. For decades, he had been quietly investing every extra dime he earned. He had bought small properties when prices were low. He had invested in company stocks that were now worth a fortune, and he had accumulated a wealth I never could have imagined in my wildest dreams. But that wasn't all. The will clearly specified that I was the sole heir to everything. Dawn would only receive a small sum if I died, and only if she had taken care of me with love and respect during my final years. My husband had been wiser than I thought. He had seen something in Dave that I had refused to recognize. There was also a clause that took my breath away. My husband was the owner of the entire building where Dawn and Dave lived. The apartment they thought they were paying for monthly was actually ours. All the tenants in the building were paying rent to us, and that rent had been automatically deposited into an account I knew nothing about. With trembling fingers, I searched through the papers until I found the bank statements. The amount was astronomical. For 2 years, since my husband's death, I had been living as a poor widow while a fortune was accumulating in the bank. There were more surprises. My husband owned shares in the company where Dave worked. Not just minor shares, but a significant enough stake that he could practically influence the company's decisions. There were also investments in restaurants, small businesses, and even a large piece of land on the outskirts of the city that was now worth millions. I read and reread every document, every contract, every certificate. Everything was there, perfectly organized and legal. My husband had built a silent empire, and I was its empress without even knowing it. But what impacted me most was a personal letter I found at the end of the folder. It was in my husband's own handwriting, addressed to me. "My dearest Maeve," the letter said, "if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you, and you have found this treasure I kept for you. Forgive me for not telling you while I was alive, but I wanted it to be a surprise for your golden years. You always worked so hard, you always sacrificed so much for Dawn and me, that I wanted to make sure you would never want for anything." Tears began to roll down my cheeks as I continued reading. I must also confess something. I never completely trusted Dave. There's something about him I don't like, an ambition that worries me. That's why I structured everything this way. If Dawn takes care of you and respects you as you deserve, she will have a comfortable life. But if she ever treats you badly or tries to take advantage of you, you have all the power to protect yourself. My husband had foreseen exactly what was happening. He had seen right through Dave from the beginning and had prepared my defense before he died. Use this power wisely, my love. Not to hurt, but to protect yourself and to teach. Deep down, Dawn is a good person. She's just confused. But if you need to defend yourself, you now have the tools to do it. Signed, your husband who loves you for all eternity. I sat on the floor of my living room, surrounded by documents worth millions, crying for the wise man I had lost and for the daughter I was about to lose. But for the first time in months, they weren't tears of defeat. They were tears of gratitude, of hope, and yes, also of silent satisfaction. Dawn and Dave thought they were stripping me of everything. They had no idea that I owned the building where they lived, the shares of the company where he worked, and properties all over the city. They thought they were throwing me out of my house to take it for themselves, not knowing that this house was the least valuable thing I owned. That night, I didn't sleep, but for the first time in weeks, it wasn't because of sadness. It was because my mind was working, planning, calculating. My husband had given me more than money. He had given me power, and now I had to decide how to use it. Monday morning arrived with a light rain tapping against the windows. Dawn and Dave showed up early with the movers, expecting to find me packed and ready to leave. Instead, they found me sitting calmly in my favorite armchair, sipping tea as if it were any other day. "Mom, what are you doing? The movers are already here," Dawn said with that impatience she had developed. "I'm not leaving anymore," I replied, with a calmness that surprised even me. Dave came closer with that threatening smile I knew so well. "Mrs. Maeve, we already talked about this. You don't have a choice." I looked him straight in the eyes for the first time in years. "You're right, Dave. I don't have a choice. But it turns out you don't either." Something in my tone must have alerted them, because Dawn came closer with a worried expression. "What are you talking about, Mom?" "I'm talking about the fact that I just discovered something very interesting about my financial situation," I said, taking another sip of tea. "But don't worry, you'll understand everything soon." Dave and Dawn looked at me with that expression they reserved for when they thought I was talking nonsense. But I was no longer the same scared woman from the week before. I had a plan, and most importantly, I had the power to execute it. "Mom, enough with the games," Dawn said with irritation. "The movers are waiting, and they have other jobs after ours." Then they can leave, I replied calmly, because they're not moving a single thing here. Dave stood up abruptly. Ma'am, I don't think you understand the situation. You no longer have a choice in this matter. On the contrary, Dave, I think it's you who doesn't understand the situation. I slowly got up from my chair and walked to the desk where I had left some of the documents I had found. Not all of them, just a few that I needed for this conversation. Did you know that your apartment, the one you've been living in for 3 years, has never been paid to the real owner? Dawn frowned. What are you talking about? We pay it religiously every month. Yes, but you pay it to a property management company that in turn deposits the money to me, because I own the entire building. The silence that followed was deafening. Dave was the first to react with a nervous laugh. That's impossible. You live on a measly pension. I lived on a pension because I chose to, I replied, enjoying every second of their confusion. My husband was much smarter than any of us imagined. I showed them one of the property deeds. Dawn took it with trembling hands and read it 1, 2, 3 times. This can't be real, she murmured. It's as real as the fact that you were throwing me out of my own house to take it for yourselves. But it turns out, this house is the least valuable thing I own. Dave snatched the document from Dawn's hands. His face turned pale as he read, This has to be fake, a forged document. You can verify it whenever you like, I said, with a smile I hadn't felt in months. In fact, I encourage you to do so. Dawn collapsed onto the sofa as if her legs had been cut out from under her. Why didn't you ever tell us anything? Because I didn't know myself until 3 days ago. Your father kept this secret to protect me. What a visionary he was. Dave began to pace the room in circles, clearly agitated. This changes everything, Dawn. If your mother really owns the building, it means she can evict you whenever she wants. Along with all the other tenants who have been paying me on time for 2 years. I completed the sentence for him. You can't do that, Dawn said, her voice cracking. We're family. Family. The word came out of my mouth with more bitterness than I intended. Like when you were going to declare me mentally incompetent to steal my house. Like when you packed my memories as if they were trash. Like when you took my mother's jewelry. Dawn began to cry, but they were no longer the manipulative tears she had learned to use. They were tears of genuine terror. Mom, please, we can fix this. It was all Dave's idea. Dawn, Dave yelled, furious that she was blaming him. It's true, she continued, ignoring him. He convinced me it was what was best for you. He said you were losing your memory, that you couldn't take care of yourself. And you believed him, I asked, feeling my heart break once more. Do you know your mother so little that you believed him over your own intuition? The movers, who had been waiting at the entrance, came closer, confused. Excuse me, are you taking the stuff or not? Because we have another job in an hour. No, I replied firmly. Nothing is being moved here. You can go. Dave came closer to me with that aggression he had always kept hidden. This isn't over, old lady. We're going to challenge those documents. We're going to prove they're fake. Go right ahead, I said, unfazed. In the meantime, I hope you have enough money saved to find somewhere else to live, because on the first day of next month, you're going to receive an eviction notice. You can't do this to us, Dave yelled, completely losing his composure. I can and I will, but don't worry, I'll be fair. I'll give you the 30 days that the law allows. Dawn stood up abruptly from the sofa. Mom, please, you have to understand. Dave told me that if I didn't convince you to move, he would leave me. He said he couldn't stand living knowing you were here alone, being a danger to yourself. And that justifies everything you did to me? I asked. It justifies treating me like trash, packing my memories without care, taking your grandmother's jewelry? I'll give it back to you right now, Dawn said, desperately searching through her purse. It's too late for that, Dawn. Dave came closer again, but this time his attitude was different. He was no longer threatening, but almost pleading. Mrs. Maeve, we can come to an agreement. Dawn is pregnant. Are you really going to throw your grandchild out on the street? I felt as if I had been punched in the stomach. Dawn was pregnant, and she hadn't told me. I was going to be a grandmother, and I found out as a piece of blackmail. Is it true? I asked Dawn. She nodded through her tears. I wanted to tell you a different way. I wanted it to be a special surprise. Like the surprise of throwing me out of my house? I replied, even though I felt my resolve beginning to waver. But then I remembered my husband's words in his letter, not to hurt, but to protect yourself and to teach. Dawn needed to learn, and her son or daughter deserved to grow up with different values than the ones Dave was teaching. The news of the pregnancy disarmed me for a moment, but then I remembered all the pain they had caused me. A baby didn't erase the humiliation, the contempt, or the months of suffering they had put me through. Congratulations on the baby, Dawn, I said, with a calmness that was hard to maintain. But that doesn't change what you did to me. Mom, please, Dawn pleaded. Think about your grandchild. Do you really want them to grow up without knowing their grandma? Their grandma was here all along, I replied. You were the ones who decided to get rid of me. Dave tried one last manipulation. Mrs. Maeve, if you really have as much money as you say, why don't you help us instead of punishing us? We could be a united family. I looked at him with the contempt he deserved. A united family? Like when you threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent? Like when you turned my daughter against me? I never— Quiet, Dave, I interrupted him with an authority I didn't know I possessed. I have heard enough of your lies. The movers had left, leaving us alone in the tension that filled the entire house. Dawn cried silently. Dave paced like a caged animal, and I felt strangely calm for the first time in months. Here's what's going to happen, I announced. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. During that time, I don't want to see you around here unless it's a real emergency. And after that? Dawn asked, her voice broken. After that, we'll see if you've learned anything about respect and family. Dave exploded. This is emotional blackmail. You're using your money to manipulate us. Manipulation? The word made me laugh bitterly. Like when you used my supposed mental incompetence to manipulate me? Like when you used my mother's love to blackmail me? It's different, Dave murmured, but he didn't even sound convincing to himself anymore. You're right, I admitted. It is different, because I actually have the power I'm using. Dawn got up from the sofa with slow movements. Is there anything we can do to make you change your mind? Yes, I replied without hesitation. But I don't think Dave is willing to do it. What is it? She asked, clinging to that hope. I want an apology, a real, sincere apology, for every humiliation you put me through. I want you to admit that you treated me like trash, and I want Dave to admit that this was all his idea. Dave's face turned red with anger. I'm never going to humiliate myself in front of you. Then get ready to move, I said simply. Dawn looked at him pleadingly. Dave, please, she's my mother. She's your mother-in-law. We can swallow our pride for our child. No, he yelled. I'm not going to bow down to this manipulative old woman. The insult hung in the air like a slap. Dawn's mouth fell open, finally seeing her husband without the lenses of blind love. Manipulative old woman, I repeated softly. Interesting. That's what you really think of me, Dave. No, Dawn murmured, but he had already lost control. Yes, that's what I think. A bitter old lady who can't stand to see her daughter happy. That's why she made up this whole story about the money. Made up? I walked to the desk and took out more documents. Did I also make up these bank statements? Did I make up these property deeds? Did I make up these stock certificates? I put each document on the dining room table, one by one, until the surface was covered with irrefutable proof of my fortune. Dawn came closer and began to examine the papers with trembling hands. Oh my God, Mom, this is real. It's all real. Very real, I confirmed, and now you understand why your husband is so desperate to discredit me. Dave tried one last gambit. Dawn, you can't believe your mother hid all this for years. She's a liar. No, Dawn suddenly yelled, surprising us all. Stop it, Dave. Just stop. She turned to me with tears streaming down her cheeks. "Mom, forgive me. Forgive me for everything. You're right. I treated you like trash. I took your memories, your jewelry, your dignity, and the worst part is that I did it because he convinced me you were a burden." "Dawn, don't listen to her," Dave tried, but she ignored him completely. "He filled my head with lies about your mental health, about the dangers of you living alone. He made me feel guilty for leaving you here when all you wanted was to be in your home." "Dawn, be quiet," Dave ordered her. But it was already too late. "Don't you ever tell me to be quiet again," she yelled at him. "I'm sick of your manipulations, sick of you using me to hurt my mother." The silence that followed was absolute. For the first time in years, Dawn had defended something she believed was right instead of blindly following her husband's orders. Dave looked at her with a coldness that chilled me to the bone. "If you choose your mother over me, Dawn, this relationship is over." Dawn stood motionless for a moment, processing the ultimatum. Then, to my surprise, she straightened up and looked him directly in the eyes. "Then it's over," she said in a voice I had never heard from her before. Dave was paralyzed, as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. For years, he had controlled her every decision, every thought, every move, and now, for the first time, she had told him, "No." "You're not serious," he murmured with a nervous smile. "You're pregnant, Dawn. You can't raise a child alone." "I won't be alone," Dawn replied, looking at me for the first time in months with something that resembled love. "I have my mother." But I wasn't ready to forgive so easily. The months of humiliation, the nights of crying, the feeling of having lost my only daughter, all that didn't just disappear with a few words. "Dawn," I said softly, "I appreciate that you finally opened your eyes, but this doesn't fix everything that happened." Her face fell. "Mom, please. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Dave, seeing that he was losing control of the situation, adopted a different attitude. He suddenly knelt in front of me with a look of repentance I knew was fake. "Mrs. Maeve, you're right. It was all my fault. I convinced Dawn that you couldn't take care of yourself. I pressured her into making difficult decisions. Please forgive me." I looked down at him, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and disgust. It was pathetic to see him grovel after months of arrogance. "You're asking for forgiveness now, Dave, when you discover that I'm not the poor, helpless old woman you thought I was?" "I was terribly wrong," he continued with that performance I also knew. "Let me make it up to you. We can be a happy family." "A happy family," I repeated. "Like when you threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent? That was a mistake. Like when you called me a manipulative old woman 5 minutes ago?" Dave swallowed hard, realizing that every word he had said was being used against him. I was upset. I didn't know what I was saying. "No," I said firmly. "You knew exactly what you were saying. You were showing your true face for the first time." I turned to Dawn, who was watching the scene with a look of shame and pain. "And you, Dawn, for months you treated me like a nuisance. Do you think an apology erases all that?" "No," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I know I can't erase what I did, but I can try to make things right." "How?" Dawn looked at Dave, who was still kneeling on the floor with a pleading expression. Then she looked at me. "By leaving him," she said finally. "By leaving this man who convinced me to betray the only person who has ever loved me unconditionally." Dave stood up abruptly. "You can't be serious. You're having my child." "I am having my child," Dawn replied with a determination that filled me with pride despite everything. "A child I don't want to grow up watching his father manipulate and mistreat his grandmother." "Dawn, you're making the biggest mistake of your life," Dave threatened. "The biggest mistake of my life was marrying you," she retorted. Dave looked at both of us with pure hatred. "This isn't over. I'm going to fight for custody of my child. I'm going to prove that both of you are crazy." "What money are you going to fight with?" I asked calmly. "Because tomorrow morning, I'm going to talk to your boss. Did you know I own enough shares in your company to influence personnel decisions? Dave's face turned completely pale. You wouldn't dare. After all you've done to me. Of course I would. That's an abuse of power, he muttered. Like when you abused my mother's love to manipulate me. Like when you abused Dawn's trust to turn her against me. Dave headed for the door, but stopped before leaving. This doesn't end here, he said, his voice full of venom. I'm going to destroy both of you. Go ahead and try, I replied, unfazed. But do it from somewhere else, because you have exactly 1 hour to get your things out of my building. 1 hour? You said we had 30 days. That was when Dawn was with you. Now that she's on her own, there's no reason for you to keep living on my property. Dave slammed the door behind him, making the whole house tremble. Dawn and I were left alone for the first time in months, surrounded by a heavy silence and documents that proved a reality that was still hard to process. Mom, Dawn murmured after a long while, can you ever forgive me? I looked at her, this 30-year-old woman who had just discovered she had been living a lie, who had betrayed her mother for a man who was worthless, who was pregnant and alone. I don't know, Dawn, I replied honestly. You hurt me a lot. I know, she whispered, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you. Starting with what? Starting with giving you back your mother's jewelry, she said, pulling out the small bag she had taken days before, and by asking if I can stay here tonight. I have nowhere else to go. I looked at the bag with my mother's jewelry. Then I looked at my pregnant and alone daughter, and I felt my heart soften just a little. One night, I said finally. But tomorrow we start talking about how you're going to earn my trust back. Dawn nodded, tears of gratitude running down her cheeks. Thank you, Mom. I promise I'm going to make things right. But I knew that promises were easy to make and hard to keep. The real test would come in the days that followed. The next few days were strange and tense. Dawn stayed in her old room, which I had kept exactly the same since she got married. During the day, we walked through the house like two polite strangers, only talking about necessary things, breakfast, the weather, her morning sickness. But I was watching every gesture, every word, every attempt Dawn made to win back my trust. And what I saw gave me hope. For the first time in years, my daughter was doing things for herself, without expecting someone else to solve them for her. She washed her dishes immediately after eating, kept her room spotless, and even started helping with chores around the house without me asking. On the third day, as I was watering my violets by the window, Dawn approached with a cup of tea in her hands. Mom, can we talk? I nodded without turning to look at her. I was learning that silence was more powerful than 1,000 words. I've been thinking a lot these past few days, she began, sitting in the chair where Dave used to sit like a king. About everything that happened, about the things I did and said. I kept watering my plants, waiting. I've realized that it wasn't just Dave who changed me. I allowed him to change me. I chose to believe him instead of trusting my own heart. I finally turned to look at her. She had deep circles under her eyes and looked thinner despite the pregnancy. It was clear she hadn't been sleeping well. And why do you think that happened? I asked her. Dawn sighed deeply. Because it was easier to blame you than to face the fact that I had married the wrong man. That honesty took me by surprise. I had expected excuses, justifications, but not that raw admission. When Dave started complaining that you visited too much, I knew deep down that he was being unfair, but it was easier to think that you were clingy than to accept that he was selfish. She put her hands on her belly, where the pregnancy was barely showing. When he started suggesting you move to a retirement community, I knew it was wrong, but he convinced me it was for your own good, and I wanted to believe him because it meant I didn't have to face the real problem. What was the real problem? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. That I had married a man who didn't respect my family, who didn't respect me, and who was never going to change. In the days that followed, Dawn began to tell me things that chilled me to the bone. how Dave had gradually isolated her from her friends, convincing her they were a bad influence, how he controlled every cent she spent, telling her that women didn't know how to handle money, how he had convinced her to quit her job because real wives dedicated themselves to the home. "And you never thought to talk to me about this?" I asked her one afternoon. "Dave told me you wouldn't understand, that you were from another generation. He convinced me that if I told you our problems, you would tell me to leave him, and he didn't want any outside interference in our marriage." Each revelation hurt more than the last. My daughter had been suffering in silence while I believed she was happy. And when she had finally tried to get closer to me, it was already too late because Dave had programmed her to see me as the enemy. 2 weeks after Dave left, Dawn received a call that left her pale as a ghost. "It's the building manager," she said, her voice trembling. "Dave is in the lobby. He says he has the right to come up because he's still my husband." "And what did you tell him?" "That I didn't want to see him, but he won't leave. He's yelling that he's going to call the police, that this is kidnapping." I got up from my chair with a calmness that surprised me. "Tell the manager to come down. I'm going to talk to him." "Mom, he's really upset. We don't know what he's capable of." "Exactly," I replied. "That's why I have to go down there." When I got to the lobby, I found Dave in a fury yelling at the poor building manager who was trembling behind his desk. "That crazy old lady has my wife kidnapped," Dave was shouting. "I want you to call the police right now." "Good afternoon, Dave," I said in a serene voice. He turned to me, his eyes bloodshot. He had obviously been drinking. "You give me back my wife right now." "Dawn is exactly where she wants to be," I replied. "And if you don't leave my property immediately, I'll be the one calling the police." "This isn't your property. You're a liar." I took out my phone and dialed my lawyer's number, putting it on speakerphone. "Attorney Victoria?" I said when she answered. "It's Maeve. I have an upset man here who refuses to leave my building. Could you confirm that I am the legal owner?" "Of course, Mrs. Maeve," my lawyer's clear voice replied. "You are the sole owner of the building located at—" Dave went silent as he listened to the legal confirmation. The manager looked at him with a mixture of fear and embarrassment, finally understanding the situation. "Anything else you need me to clarify, Dave?" I asked after hanging up. "This isn't over," he muttered, but he no longer sounded convincing. "You're right," I agreed, "because tomorrow I'll talk to your supervisor at the company, and the day after that, to the bank that gave you the loan for your car. Contacts are useful when you have enough money." Dave left without another word, but I knew he would be back. Men like him don't give up easily. 2 months later, the day of the trial arrived like a storm we had been waiting for. Dave had made good on his threat and sued us for parental alienation and financial manipulation, asking for full custody of the baby Dawn was carrying. That morning, as I was getting dressed in my best black suit, Dawn came into my room with tears in her eyes. "Mom, I'm scared," she confessed. "What if the judge believes him? What if he takes my baby away?" I hugged her for the first time in months, feeling her body tremble against mine. "That's not going to happen," I assured her. "We have the truth on our side." When we arrived at the courthouse, Dave was already there with a lawyer who had clearly cost him more than he could afford. He looked at me with that familiar hatred, but this time, it didn't intimidate me. I had something he would never have, the peace of mind of someone who knows they are on the right side. Dawn and I sat down on our bench. She wore a purple dress that highlighted her 5-month pregnancy, and I wore the earrings my husband had given me for our anniversary. We were prepared. Dave's lawyer began his argument, painting me as a vengeful woman who had used her money to destroy a happy marriage. He talked about manipulation, emotional blackmail, and a toxic mother-in-law who couldn't accept that her daughter had grown up. When it was our turn, my lawyer, Victoria, stood up elegantly and began to present the evidence. Text messages where Dave insulted Dawn, recordings where he threatened to leave her if she didn't throw me out of my own house, testimonies from neighbors who had heard his yelling and abuse. But the decisive moment came when the judge looked up and stared at me. "Mrs. Maeve Williams?" he asked in disbelief. "Yes, Your Honor," I replied, confused by his reaction. The judge took off his glasses and studied me carefully. "Did you work at the family court 30 years ago?" My heart stopped. "Yes, Your Honor. I was a secretary for Judge Miller. You helped me when I was an intern. You taught me how to organize files. You brought me coffee when I worked late. You were always kind to me when everyone else treated me like I was invisible." The entire courtroom fell silent. Dawn looked at me in amazement. Dave turned pale, and I felt as if the world had stopped. "Your Honor, I am Judge David Morales," the judge continued. "Do you remember me?" And then I saw it. Under the gray hair, the wrinkles, and the authority was the shy young man who had worked in my office decades ago, the boy I had defended when other lawyers made fun of him, the one I had encouraged when he doubted his abilities. "David," I murmured, feeling my eyes fill with tears. "Of course I remember you." The judge smiled, and for a moment he was that insecure young man again, looking for approval. "I never forgot your kindness, Mrs. Maeve. You told me that one day I would be a great judge when even I didn't believe it." Dave and his lawyer exchanged panicked glances. They knew they had lost before they even began. "Your Honor," Dave's lawyer interjected, "I believe this constitutes a conflict of interest." "There is no conflict," Judge Morales replied firmly. "There is only justice. And after reviewing all the evidence presented, it is clear that Mr. Dave Foster has been the only manipulator in this story." The verdict was resounding. Dave lost all his rights to the baby and was prohibited from approaching Dawn and me. He also had to pay the legal costs and a settlement for emotional damages. When we left the courthouse, Dawn hugged me as she hadn't since she was a child. "Mom, how is it possible that the judge knew you?" "Life goes in circles, honey," I replied, "and kindness always comes back to you when you least expect it." 6 months later, when my granddaughter Serenity was born, I understood that everything had been worth it. Dawn had regained her essence. She had become the loving mother I always knew she could be. One afternoon, as we rocked the baby in the garden of our house, Dawn asked me a question I had been waiting for. "Mom, have you really forgiven me?" I looked at her. This woman who had grown so much in such a short time, who had learned to value what was truly important. "I forgive you, Dawn," I said finally. "But more importantly, you've learned to forgive yourself." That night, as I prepared tea in my old chipped mug, I thought about my husband and his letter. I had used the power he left me exactly as he had expected, not to hurt, but to protect and to teach. Dawn had learned that true love isn't based on control, but on respect. And I had learned that it's never too late to stand up for your dignity. Looking out the window at the garden where my granddaughter was playing, I smiled. Some battles are worth fighting, and some victories taste better when they take a long time to arrive. In the end, I hadn't needed to yell to be heard. I had only needed to remember who I really was and defend it with the peace of mind of someone who knows they are on the right side of history. 5 years after the trial, my life had taken a turn I never could have imagined. Little Serenity, now a 4-year-old girl with her mother's lively eyes and my same stubbornness, ran through the garden chasing butterflies while Dawn and I prepared Sunday lunch. "Grandma Maeve, look what I found!" Serenity yelled, running toward me with a yellow flower in her small hands. "It's beautiful, my love," I said, lifting her up to give her a kiss. "Should we put it in the vase with the others?" Dawn smiled at me from the kitchen. In these years, she had bloomed in an extraordinary way. She had gone back to school and was now working as an accountant at a small but prosperous firm. And most of all, she had regained that spontaneous laugh I remembered from her childhood. "Mom, a letter came for you," she said, handing me an elegant envelope. It was from the foundation I had established 2 years ago with part of my husband's inheritance. Home and Dignity had become a refuge for older women who were suffering from familial abuse or abandonment. What had started as a way to honor my own experience had transformed into something much bigger. "What does it say?" Dawn asked, drying her hands on her apron. "They're inviting us to the inauguration of the third house," I replied, feeling that deep satisfaction that only comes from knowing your pain served a good purpose. "They're going to house 15 more women." In these years, we had helped more than 50 women rebuild their lives. Some arrived as I had been, stripped of their dignity by ungrateful children or abusive relatives. Others came alone, without family, but with similar stories of abandonment and mistreatment. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. Dawn went to open it and came back with a mysterious smile. "Mom, you have a visitor." Behind her appeared retired Judge David Morales, accompanied by an elegant woman with silver hair. "Mrs. Maeve," he greeted me with that warm smile he had kept since he was young. "I want to introduce you to my wife, Elena." "It's an honor to meet you," Elena said, taking my hands. "David has told me so much about you. He says you were one of the most important people in his professional training." "He exaggerates," I replied, but I was deeply moved. "Not at all," David insisted, "and that's why we wanted to invite you personally. The Retired Judges Association is going to give you an award for your work with the foundation." "That's not necessary," I began to say. "Yes, it is," he interrupted me. "Your story inspired many of us to reflect on true justice, the kind that goes beyond written laws." After they left, Dawn and I sat on the porch while Serenity played with her dolls. The garden was more beautiful than ever. I had hired a gardener, but I still personally took care of the African violets my husband loved so much. "Do you know what I admire most about you, Mom?" Dawn asked me suddenly. "What?" "That you never got bitter after everything I put you through. After all the pain, you never let it harden your heart." "Of course I got bitter," I admitted. "There were nights when resentment was eating me up inside. But your father taught me something very valuable in his letter." "What did he teach you?" "That true power doesn't come from revenge, but from the ability to transform pain into something useful for others." Dawn nodded, understanding. She had experienced that transformation herself. She now volunteered at the foundation, using her own experience to advise young women who had fallen into toxic relationships. "Did you ever find out what happened to Dave?" she asked. "My lawyer, Victoria, told me he moved to another city. It seems he got married again." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "I hope he learned something from all this, but honestly, it's no longer my concern." "You're not even curious?" "No," I replied honestly. "I learned that some people only come into your life to teach you lessons. Once you've learned the lesson, you can let them go." Serenity came running with her cheeks rosy from playing. "Grandma, will you tell me the story of the brave grandma?" It was her favorite story, a version adapted for children of what had happened. In my version, the grandma discovered she had magical powers and used them to protect her family from a big, bad dragon. "Again?" I pretended to complain, but I was already lifting her up to sit her on my lap. "Yes, and don't forget the part where the good judge helps her." As I told the story for the umpteenth time, I thought about how strange destiny was. I had needed to lose everything to discover what I truly had. I had to hit rock bottom to find my real strength. "And happily ever after?" Serenity asked when I finished. "Happily ever after," I concluded. "The brave grandma found her happy ending." "You found your happy ending, Grandma," Serenity said. I looked around. Dawn was setting the table for dinner. The garden was blooming. My beautiful granddaughter was in my arms, and the letter from the foundation promised to help even more women. "Yes, my love," I replied. I did. That night, after putting Serenity to bed, I sat in my favorite armchair with a cup of tea and the letters that arrived weekly from the women we had helped. An elderly woman, 75 years old, thanked me for giving her the courage to face her abusive son. A 60-year-old woman told me she had gotten her house back after her grandchildren had tried to swindle her. Every letter was a confirmation that my experience had served a purpose bigger than my own pain. Dawn sat next to me with her own cup of tea. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" "About your father," I admitted. "How proud he would be of what we've built." "I'm sure he's watching us," Dawn murmured. "And about you," I continued. "How proud I am of the woman you've become." "I learned from the best," she replied, taking my hand. We sat in silence, enjoying the tranquility of the night. In the distance, the soft noise of the city could be heard. But here, in our garden, peace reigned. "I love you, Mom," Dawn whispered. "And I love you, honey," I replied. "I've always loved you, even in the darkest moments." And it was true. A mother's love transcends hurts, disappointments, betrayals. It's stronger than pride, more enduring than resentment, more powerful than any fortune. That night, I slept soundly, without nightmares, without worries. I had found something worth more than all the money in the world, the peace of knowing that I had used my second chance wisely. In the end, it wasn't about how much money I had or how much power I had exercised. It was about transforming my pain into purpose, my humiliation into strength, and my experience into wisdom for others. I had learned the most important lesson of all, that it is never too late to stand up for yourself, never too late to change your story, and never too late to find your true worth.